So you want to start a podcast. Hey everybody, it's Pistol Pete here. Today we're talking about the top 5 things that I wish I knew before I started a podcast. So sort of like what I would imagine is tips for someone who wants to start a podcast in 2021 or 2022. It's only like 3 months away, 2 months away. No, it's October. So that means we have, no, it's not October yet. So that means we have October, November. So yeah, 3 months away until 2022. Huh? What? Oh. What would I tell somebody who wanted to start a podcast? This actually was a question that a friend of mine asked me because they wanted to start a podcast with some people that he knew, and I put together this long list of stuff that I know. Now, I have my own podcast called Nerds Adulting, which we just hit 6,000 plays, which is pretty amazing, I think. It's a decent podcast. I really am proud of the work that we've done. We've had some fairly famous people on there, and I put a lot of work into it, and so I'm proud of the work that I've done. And creating and growing a podcast is very, very hard, but I wanted to talk about some of the things that I've learned along the way, and hopefully they'll help you out. I hope. If you all are interested, you can also catch me on Twitch, where I stream Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, and I do squeeze in a few streams in there in the evenings time frames, but yeah, you can pretty much catch me Monday, Wednesday, Saturday pretty consistently when I stream. It's Pistol Pete _nap, same thing for everything. So check me out there, and yeah, let's hang out and watch me be an idiot. This is not for someone that's been doing this for a long time or has had a podcast. Or this is people that are just cold turkey and want to start a podcast. So, like we said, equipment is a big thing because you need a microphone and you need a computer and you need all sorts of stuff to make a podcast. So the first thing on my list, number 1, is a microphone. There are a bajillion different microphones out there. There's all kinds of videos on them, and I'm not going to give you like a side-by-side comparison about which one's best. I'm talking about the ones that I like, the ones that I've used since I started a podcast. So I went through many different types of microphones, and I finally found one that stuck. So I first started off with a really terrible, the mic that I used was this generic headset that was just not good. It was terrible. The audio quality was awful. I don't recommend using headsets to record a podcast. I just don't. The mics in there just aren't, the quality of microphone in those headsets are just not conducive to podcasting, in my opinion. So you have 2 different mics. One is USB mic, and then there are what's called XLR mics. XLR mics need more, you need extra equipment for power, and they are much more expensive, but they give you lots more range and lots more abilities to like alter your voice and tons of other things, but they're really expensive. They're much more expensive than a USB mic. If you're starting out, USB mic is fine. So when you get down to USB mics, you have different types of microphones. You have like what's called dynamic and omnidirectional microphones. Now, omnidirectional microphones are sort of like, well, the Yetis and the Snowballs that you see a lot of streamers use, or a lot of of them are catered to streamers. But omnidirectional mics pick up everything. A fly buzzing around, it's gonna catch that. Your mailman, get your dogs barking, it's gonna catch that. Cars driving by, you're gonna catch that. It's gonna ruin the quality of your audio. But there are ways to circumvent that, which I'll get into a little bit here in editing software. Then you have dynamic microphones, which are designed for like more straightforward. Typically it's like handheld microphones you hold. You see singers and performers use. Those are typically dynamic microphones, and that's my preference. I have a dynamic microphone. Once I switched over, I felt like the audio quality and everything improved much more. One thing I will say about omnidirectional mics is they are good. They do have good quality, especially if you're doing a single person podcast or if you're just doing single person audio. They are great. Now, my recommendation is the Samson Q2U. Just, it's what I use. It works great. It's a USB microphone. It actually has XLR ability or inputs you can use if you decide to go to that. I can't say enough about this mic. Audio quality is great. It works fantastic. If you want to go with the Samson QTU, they're usually around 60 bucks. So I highly recommend this one if you're just starting out. That's gonna be good. Number 2 is recording and editing software. Now, like I said, if you're a beginner, there's tons of stuff that you can use, but if you're just beginning, I like Zoom. I know probably a lot of people are gonna blast me in the comments, but Zoom, everyone uses Zoom, especially if you're having guests on. Oh, I don't know, what am I doing? You can separate the audio from each participant, which is huge when editing your podcast. I would not recommend using Discord. It will work. There's ways you can also separate audio using bots, like CraigBot's a famous one or a very popular one that people use. I just don't like Discord. I would not recommend. I would recommend Zoom. If you're just starting out, use Zoom. Now, another program that I use when I'm not using Zoom, or sort of as like a backup for recording my own audio, I just like OBS. I use OBS for streaming. I use OBS for my podcast. I know it's a video recording tool, streaming tool as well, but I like that I can record. I like to do a lot of video work too, so I'll record the Zoom calls, and I can turn that stuff into videos and whatnot, but it also can record my audio. And this is where I was talking about going back to omnidirectional mics. With omnidirectional mics, like I said, it picks up everything. Even dynamic mics can do that too, pick up a lot of background noise. There are things called audio filters that can block out those annoying noises, things that could ruin your recording. So you can like do a noise gate, you can do a limiter, so you can limit the loudness, and then you can do noise suppression. So you have limiters, you have noise gate, and then you have noise suppression, and that really helps your audio quality. And that's what I use mostly for my own audio. That's what I use for my audio, and then I'll cut in when I'm editing the audio that Zoom has separated for me after we've done the video call. And that works great too, so then I can play with, you can actually see the levels too from when they're talking and when you're talking. So I just like using OBS, and it does its job. Like again, if you're new and you're just starting out, I highly recommend using OBS. And did I say OBS was free? OBS is 100% free. You don't have to pay anything. Now there's other free software too, such as Audacity. You can set up Audacity to record while you're doing your podcast, and it works great. I never really used it. I just like what OBS has to offer, and I like the setup for Zoom, and so it just does its job for me, and I don't use it. But it is an option, and it's also free. Audacity is free. Another one that a lot of people seem to like to use, not even just for podcasting but for music editing, is GarageBand. I've never used GarageBand, but it is for Mac. So if you have Mac OS, that is an option that you can use, and it's also free. And then we're gonna get into editing. So editing, you gotta edit your pod, right? We're talking about recording. Number 2 is recording and editing software. So Audacity is also what I use for editing my podcast. I can edit the audio how I see fit. The only thing I will say is Audacity was recently purchased by Muse Group, and earlier this year they released a privacy statement where they are collecting some information, and it seemed a little bit shady, and so the community is not too happy about that. So I just want to throw that out there. If you're very worried about your privacy, I would look into that aspect when using Audacity. And then one of the last things that I use is called Alphonic. It actually, once I'm done editing everything in Audacity, I upload it to Alphonic, and it levels everything. So it takes all your highs and brings them down, so you have like a nice sort of like even audio file where nothing's too loud, and it sets everything to like the industry standards of, I think it's -16 LUFS. Don't ask me what that means yet because I don't know what it stands for, but that's like sort of like the audio standard for podcasts and for FM and things like that. What is that? What is that? Onion? Number 3, hosting provider. How are you gonna get your podcast out to the public so people can listen to it? You have to have a hosting provider. Some of the hosting providers out there are Audioboom, SoundCloud, Libsyn, and there's a bunch others out there. Now that's different than Apple Podcasts. Now what happens with your hosting provider is your hosting provider sort of acts like YouTube for your audio. You upload it and it stays on their server, and then through an RSS feed, it sends it out to podcast players, which make it searchable, like Amazon, Apple, Spotify. Now that's something completely different versus your hosting provider. After you've uploaded your audio to your hosting provider, you need to link it to these players. I personally like Audioboom because they make it really simple to get your podcast synced with these players, so it's indexed and searchable on things like Apple Podcasts and Spotify. They have all the links there for you, and they go through it and they make it very, very simple. All right, so the one thing that we'll say about getting your podcast connected to these players or to these searchable platforms is Apple is probably the most weird one. You have to create an account, you have to go in there, you have to provide your RSS feed, which is given to you by your hosting provider, and and then you got to wait like a certain amount of time before they can approve it. And the last one is your format. I wish when I started I knew what format I wanted to do. Do you want to do a documentary type podcast? Do you want to do a discussion type podcast? Do you want to do true crime? Do you want to do video games? Do you want to do sports? Think about what you want to do. Think hard about what you want to do. Find your niche. It makes it so much easier when you're trying to come up with episodes. So like for me, for example, we have a nerdy podcast that has a large focus on video games, but other nerdy culture, pop culture stuff. And so one of the ideas that I had come up with was every month we do a retro episode on something that we loved from our pastime, and then we do a deep dive on it. And so then every month I knew we had that in the back. We can just, that's a topic, we just need to find something that we loved as a kid, and then we do a deep dive on it, we do research, and we'll talk about it. I will say also, if you're doing a discussion podcast, I highly recommend that you iron out everyone's roles. Make sure everyone has a common understanding of what everyone wants to do. Josh, we have a common understanding. Josh knows that this is my baby, and he just shows up, does an amazing job, and then we're done with it. I do the editing, I do the format, I do include him on some of the creative stuff, but we have a common understanding. One of the biggest mistakes I made in my very first podcast was one, I did it with friends and we didn't really think about it. And one of my friends wanted to do more movie stuff, I wanted to do more video game stuff, I wanted to do more guest stuff, and it ultimately just crashed and burned. He went off to do something different, which is fine, and I went off to do Nerds Adulting. Find a format that you like and make sure you have a common understanding with your co-host. What's that smell? All right, everybody, that's all that I have for this episode. If you found it interesting, or you thought I said something wrong, or I did say something wrong, or whatever, just let me know in the comments. Let me know what you like. And also, subscribe and like.